The scream cut through the October night like broken glass. Zara Kim froze on the sidewalk, her nursing bag heavy against her shoulder, every instinct from 12 years in emergency medicine snapping to attention. The sound had come from the narrow alley between the old brick buildings, the kind of desperate cry that made her think of children and predators and all the reasons she carried pepper spray in her scrubs pocket. She should call the police. She should walk away. She should remember that this neighborhood after midnight was no place for a woman alone, even one who had grown up on these streets. But the sound came again, higher pitched, definitely a child, and Zara was already moving toward the darkness before her rational mind could stop her. I wonder where you are watching from tonight. Do you live in a city where you hear sounds like this and have to decide whether to get involved? Comment below and let me know what state or country you're calling home while you listen to this story. The alley reeked of garbage and old rain. 3 men surrounded something small and huddled against the brick wall, their voices low and threatening in a language that sounded like Korean mixed with English. Zara caught fragments as she crept closer, staying in the shadows. You will come with us now. Your father thinks he can hide you forever. Stupid boy, you should have stayed inside where it's safe. The child whimpered, a sound so broken it made Zara's chest tighten with protective fury. She could see him now in the weak streetlight filtering through the alley mouth. 8 years old, maybe 9, with dark hair falling across his face and expensive clothes torn at the sleeves. Blood on his forehead, terror in his posture as he pressed himself against the wall like he could disappear into the brick. One of the men grabbed the boy's arm, hauling him upright. The child cried out again, and something in Zara snapped clean in half. Hey, she called out, stepping into the light with her hands raised but visible, her voice carrying the authority she had learned in trauma bays when dealing with violent family members and drug-addled patients. Let him go. Now. The 3 men turned toward her with the fluid coordination of predators who work together often. They were all Korean, dressed in dark clothes that looked expensive despite the alley setting, and they moved like men who were comfortable with violence. The tallest one smiled at her, but there was nothing warm in the expression. Walk away, lady, he said in accented English. This is family business. Nothing for you to worry about. Zara kept walking toward them, her heart hammering against her ribs but her voice steady. Family business does not usually involve bleeding children in alleys at midnight. I'm a nurse. Let me look at his head. The man's smile disappeared. I said walk away. You do not want to make this your problem. Too late for that, Zara said, and pulled out her phone with one hand while keeping the other visible. Speed dial for 911 was muscle memory. The police are already on their way. Domestic dispute in progress. Injuries to a minor. They will be here in 3 minutes. It was a lie, but a convincing one. She called no one, but the bluff worked better than she had hoped. The 3 men exchanged rapid words in Korean, their body language shifting from predatory confidence to nervous calculation. The tall one grabbed the boy's shoulder with enough force to make him stumble. You should have stayed out of this, he snarled at Zara, but he was already backing toward the other end of the alley, his companions following. This is not over, boy. Your father cannot protect you everywhere. We know where you live. We know where you go to school. We know everything. The sound of sirens began in the distance, faint but growing stronger. Real sirens this time, though Zara had no idea why. The 3 men cursed and ran, disappearing into the maze of back streets that honeycombed this part of the city. Zara dropped to her knees beside the child, who was shaking so hard his teeth chattered. He looked up at her with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone his age, dark and wary and measuring her the way adults measured threats. Are you hurt? She asked gently, reaching for her nursing bag and the small flashlight she always carried. Can you tell me your name? Minjun, he whispered, his English careful and precise despite the terror. My name is Minjun Han. They were going to take me away from my father. Zara clicked on the flashlight and examined the cut on his forehead. Superficial, but head wounds bled dramatically, and this one had scared him badly. She pulled antiseptic wipes from her bag, moving slowly so she would not startle him further. Well, Minjun Han, no one is taking you anywhere tonight. she said as she cleaned the wound with gentle efficiency. Those men are gone, and you are safe now. But we need to get you home to your father. Do you have his phone number? Minjun nodded, but made no move to recite it. Instead, he studied her face in the flashlight beam, his expression old beyond his years. You are not afraid of me, he said, as if this surprised him. Why would I be afraid of you? Zara asked, applying a butterfly bandage with practiced precision. You are hurt and alone and probably scared out of your mind. There is nothing frightening about that. Most people are afraid, Minjun said quietly, when they know who my father is, when they know what he does. The sirens were closer now, definitely heading in their direction. Zara helped Minjun to his feet, noting that despite his torn clothes and obvious trauma, he carried himself with unusual dignity. His shoes were leather, handmade and expensive. His watch was the kind that cost more than she made in a month. Whatever his father did, it paid very well. I do not know who your father is or what he does, she said, slipping her arm around the boy's shoulders when he swayed slightly. All I know is that you needed help and I was here to give it. That is all that matters right now. Minjun looked up at her with something that might have been wonder. You saved me, he said, the words carrying weight she did not understand. You could have walked away, but you saved me instead. Of course I did, Zara said, because it was that simple in her mind. You needed help. The police cars rounded the corner with lights flashing, and Minjun tensed against her side. More strangers, more questions, more complications to a night that had already gone far beyond what either of them had expected. But Zara kept her arm around his shoulders, steady and warm, and for the first time since the men had grabbed him, Minjun felt something that might have been safe. He did not know yet that saving him would change everything for the woman who had stepped out of the shadows. He did not know that his father would move heaven and earth to find the nurse who had protected his son. He did not know that Zara Kim had just walked into a world where kindness was rare and courage was rewarded with consequences that lasted forever. All he knew was that when he needed someone most, she had been there. And in the weeks that followed, that single act of compassion would bind their lives together in ways none of them could have imagined. The knock came at 7 a.m, 3 precise raps that somehow managed to sound both polite and utterly final. Zara paused with her coffee cup halfway to her lips, glancing toward the small bedroom where Minjun still slept. The boy had finally drifted off around 4, after hours of nightmares and whispered fears about the men in the alley. She had spent most of the night in the chair beside his bed, watching his face smooth from terror into something approaching peace. The knock repeated, same rhythm, same controlled authority. Zara set down her coffee and moved to the door, checking the peephole out of habit. What she saw made her blood freeze. 4 men stood in the hallway outside her apartment. They wore expensive suits despite the early hour, and they carried themselves with the stillness of predators waiting to strike. The one in front was tall and broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his black hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her building's security in a single glance. Even through the distortion of the peephole, Zara could see that this man was dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with size or weapons. He radiated control like other people radiated heat, and when he looked directly at her door, she had the unsettling feeling that he could see through the steel and would as clearly as she could see him. Miss Kim, he said, his voice carrying through the door with quiet authority. My name is Jinwoo Han. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Zara's hand tightened on the doorknob. The last name clicked into place with devastating clarity. Min Han. This was the boy's father, and he had brought what looked like a small army to collect him. She thought about the expensive clothes, the handmade shoes, the watch that cost more than her monthly rent. She thought about the way the men in the alley had spoken about hiding and protection and knowing where the boy lived. Most of all, she thought about the fear in Minjun's voice when he said that people were afraid when they knew what his father did. I need to see some identification, she called through the door, proud that her voice remained steady. And I need to know that you are who you claim to be before I open this door. There was a pause, and she heard the low murmur of voices speaking in Korean. Then Jinwoo Han spoke again, and this time there was something that might have been respect in his tone. You are wise to be cautious, Miss Kim. I will slide my identification under the door. You will find that everything is in order. A business card appeared beneath her door, followed by a driver's license and what looked like a government identification of some kind. Zara picked them up with hands that trembled only slightly. Jinwoo Han, Chief Executive Officer, Hansung Import-Export Corporation. The business card was heavy stock, expensive, with Korean characters beneath the English text. The driver's license showed the same man she had seen through the peephole, though the photograph made him look somehow less dangerous than the reality. The government ID was harder to read, but the seal looked official and the photograph matched. She was still studying the documents when Minjun appeared beside her, rubbing sleep from his eyes and wearing the oversized t-shirt she had found for him to sleep in. He saw the cards in her hands and went very still. Appa, he whispered, the Korean word for father falling from his lips like a prayer. Is it your father outside? Minjun, Zara asked gently, kneeling to meet his eyes. The boy nodded, but instead of relief, his expression showed something closer to resignation. He will be angry that I was caught, he said quietly. He will think I was not careful enough. Zara felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. You are 8 years old, she said firmly. Being careful is not your job. That is what adults are for. She stood and unlocked the door, opening it just wide enough to face Jinwoo Han directly. Up close, he was even more intimidating than she had expected. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with the kind of physical presence that made her small hallway feel suddenly cramped. His suit was perfectly tailored, his shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and his dark eyes missed nothing as they cataloged her appearance, her apartment, and the boy who stood half-hidden behind her legs. Mr. Han, she said evenly, your son is safe. He was injured last night, but I have treated the wound and it should heal without complications. Jinwoo Han's gaze moved from her face to Minjun, and the transformation was immediate. All the controlled menace melted away, replaced by something raw and desperate that he tried to hide but could not quite manage. Minjun, he said, dropping to one knee in the hallway and opening his arms. The boy launched himself forward, wrapping his arms around his father's neck with enough force to knock a smaller man backward. Jinwoo held him fiercely, one hand cradling the back of his son's head while the other pressed against his spine as if to convince himself that the boy was real and whole and breathing. I thought I had lost you, he whispered in Korean, the words rough with emotion that Zara was not supposed to understand but somehow did anyway. They stayed like that for a long moment, father and son clinging to each other in her doorway while the 3 other men maintained their vigilant watch. When they finally separated, Jinwoo's eyes were bright with unshed tears that he blinked away with practiced efficiency. He stood slowly, his hands still resting on Minjun's shoulders, and looked at Zara with an expression she could not quite read. You saved him, he said simply. The men who took him would have killed him before morning if you had not intervened. There are no words adequate to express my gratitude, Miss Kim. I did what anyone would have done, Zara replied, though she knew it was not true. Most people would have called the police and walked away. Most people would not have put themselves between predators and prey in a dark alley at midnight. No, Jinwoo said quietly. Most people would have done nothing. Most people see danger and look away. You saw my son in trouble and stepped toward it instead. That makes you extraordinary. Minjun tugged at his father's jacket, speaking rapidly in Korean. Zara caught enough to understand that he was explaining about the men, the alley, the way she had scared them away with her phone call bluff. Jinwoo listened with the focused attention of someone receiving a mission briefing, his expression growing darker with each detail. When Minjun finished, Jinwoo was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Zara with eyes that held depths she was not sure she wanted to explore. These men who threatened my son, he said carefully. Did they say anything about who sent them? Did they mention names or organizations that you recognized? They spoke mostly in Korean, Zara admitted. But they knew things about Minjun. They knew where he lived, where he went to school. They said his father could not protect him everywhere. Something shifted behind Jinwoo's eyes, a coldness that made the temperature in the hallway seem to drop 10 degrees. Yes, he said softly. They would know these things. My enemies are very thorough in their planning. Enemies, Zara repeated slowly. Mr. Han, I think there are things about last night that I do not understand. Jinwoo studied her face for a moment, as if weighing how much truth she could handle. Many things, Miss Kim, more than you could imagine. But what you need to understand is that my son is in danger. Constant danger. Last night was not an isolated incident. It was an escalation. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather checkbook, his movements smooth and practiced. I would like to compensate you for your heroism, Miss Kim, and for your discretion. What happened last night must not become public knowledge. My son's safety depends on it. Zara looked at the checkbook and felt something cold settle in her stomach. Keep your money, Mr. Han. I do not need payment for doing the right thing. Jinwoo paused with his pen halfway to the page, clearly surprised. Everyone needs payment for something, Miss Kim. Everyone has a price. I have found this to be universally true. Then you have been meeting the wrong people, Zara said flatly. I helped your son because he needed help, not because I expected reward. The silence stretched between them, filled with some kind of measurement that Zara did not understand, but could feel nonetheless. Jinwoo slowly closed the checkbook and returned it to his jacket. You are either very naive or very dangerous, Miss Kim, he said finally. I have not yet decided which. Maybe I am both, Zara replied, surprised by her own boldness. Jinwoo smiled then, the first real expression of warmth she had seen from him. It transformed his entire face, making him look younger and somehow more human despite the expensive clothes and the bodyguards and the aura of barely contained violence. Yes, he said quietly. I believe you might be. Minjun had been listening to this exchange with the focused attention of a child who understood far more than adults gave him credit for. Now he looked up at his father with an expression that was part hope and part desperation. Appa, he said carefully. Miss Zara makes good pancakes, and she knows how to fix nightmares. Jinwoo's attention sharpened, focusing on his son with laser intensity. Nightmares, Minjun. You had nightmares last night. The boy nodded solemnly. About the men, about Iyama. But Miss Zara sat with me and told me stories about brave nurses who save people. And she made them go away. Something cracked in Jinwoo's carefully controlled expression. His wife had been dead for 2 years, killed in a car accident that he still suspected was not entirely accidental. Minjun had not slept through the night since her funeral, and no amount of therapy or medication or gentle coaxing had helped. But this stranger, this nurse who had stumbled into their lives by accident, had managed what teams of specialists could not. Jinwoo looked at Zara with new eyes, seeing past the simple apartment and the modest clothes to something that might be exactly what his broken family needed. Miss Kim, he said slowly, I would like to discuss a proposition with you, one that might benefit us both. Jinwoo Han returned exactly 24 hours later, arriving at Zara's apartment building with the precision of a man who viewed punctuality as a form of respect. This time he came alone, though Zara suspected his security team was positioned somewhere nearby, invisible but vigilant. He wore a different suit today, charcoal gray instead of black, but the same air of controlled authority emanated from him, like expensive cologne. When she opened the door, he bowed slightly in the traditional Korean manner, a gesture that somehow managed to be both respectful and commanding. Miss Kim, he said formally, thank you for agreeing to see me. I hope you have had time to consider what we discussed yesterday. Actually, we did not discuss anything yesterday, Zara replied, stepping aside to let him enter her modest living room. You mentioned a proposition, but Minjun was there, and you never elaborated. Jinwoo glanced around her apartment with the same cataloging attention he had shown the day before. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her second-hand furniture, her small kitchen, her collection of medical textbooks stacked on every available surface. Did he see poverty or simplicity? Did he see someone he could buy, or someone who had chosen a different kind of wealth? You are correct, he said, settling into her armchair with fluid grace despite his size. Perhaps we should remedy that now. With your permission, I would like to make you an offer that could change both our lives. Zara remained standing, arms crossed, studying this man who had walked into her ordinary world and somehow made everything feel different just by being present. "I am listening, Mr. Han." Jinwoo leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes holding hers with unwavering intensity. "My son needs you, Miss Kim. Not your medical skills, though those are valuable. Not your kindness, though that is rare. He needs you specifically, the woman who saw him in danger and chose to act. The woman who made his nightmares disappear with stories about brave nurses." Zara felt her defenses rising like shields. "I am glad I could help him that night, but I am not a miracle worker, Mr. Han. I am just a nurse who happened to be in the right place at the right time." "No," Jinwoo said quietly, and there was something implacable in his voice that made her listen despite herself. "You are the first person in 2 years who has been able to reach my son. Do you understand what that means, Miss Kim? Do you comprehend the significance of what you accomplished in a single night?" She thought about Minjun's small hand in hers, the way he had finally stopped shaking when she told him stories about healing people instead of hurting them. She thought about the trust in his eyes when he asked her to make the bad dreams go away. "Tell me about his mother," she said instead of answering his question. Jinwoo's composure cracked just slightly, a hairline fracture in his perfect control. "She died when Minjun was 6, he said carefully. "Car accident on a rainy night. The investigation concluded that her brakes had been tampered with." Zara felt ice settle in her stomach. "Someone killed her. Someone killed Minjun's mother." Jinwoo nodded once, sharp and final. "My wife understood the risks of being married to me, Miss Kim. She knew that my business creates enemies who do not hesitate to target families. But she believed that love was worth the danger. Minjun was too young to understand such choices." "What kind of business creates those kinds of enemies?" Zara asked, though she suspected she already knew. "The kind that requires difficult decisions and absolute loyalty," Jinwoo replied evenly. "The kind that protects hundreds of families but puts my own at constant risk. Import and export is a complicated industry, Miss Kim, especially when your competitors have no regard for law or human life." Zara studied his face, reading the careful neutrality that told her more than words could. Import and export was definitely not the whole story, but she found that she did not need the complete truth to understand the essential reality. This man lived in a world where people died for crossing the wrong lines, and his son was a target because of who his father was. "So what exactly are you proposing?" she asked. Jinwoo reached into his jacket and withdrew a manila envelope, placing it on her coffee table with the same precision he applied to everything else. "I am offering you a position as Minjun's private caregiver and medical aid. The compensation package includes salary, housing, medical benefits, and a substantial completion bonus. The terms are outlined in detail." Zara picked up the envelope but did not open it. "How substantial is substantial, Mr. Han?" "More than you earn in 5 years as a hospital nurse," he said without hesitation. "Enough to pay off your student loans, purchase a house, secure your future completely." She opened the envelope and scanned the contract inside, her eyes widening despite her efforts to remain composed. The salary figures were staggering, the benefits package more comprehensive than anything she had ever imagined. But the terms of employment made her stomach clench with uneasiness. "This contract is for 1 year," she said slowly, "and it requires me to live in your home, follow your security protocols, and have no contact with the outside world except through approved channels." Jinwoo's expression remained neutral. "My son's safety requires these precautions, Miss Kim. The people who killed his mother are still active, still dangerous. They view him as leverage against me. Living in my home means living in a fortress." "A fortress or a prison?" Zara asked. "The distinction is often a matter of perspective," Jinwoo replied. "But I can promise you that you would be treated as an honored guest, not a captive. Your comfort and well-being would be my responsibility." "And what about my life, Mr. Han? My job, my friends, my freedom to come and go as I choose?" Jinwoo leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers in a gesture that reminded her of a chess player contemplating his next move. "Your current job places you in danger every day, Miss Kim. Emergency room nurses face violence, disease, and trauma as routine occupational hazards. My offer would remove those risks while allowing you to use your skills in a more specialized capacity. You have not answered my question about freedom. Freedom is an illusion for people in my world, he said quietly. But safety is not. I can offer you and my son absolute protection in exchange for temporary limitations on movement. After 1 year, you would be free to go wherever you choose with enough money to ensure you never have to work again unless you want to. Zara set the contract aside and looked at this man who spoke of freedom and imprisonment with the same calm authority. I need to think about this, Mr. Han. What you're offering is life-changing, but what you're asking for is also life-changing. I do not make decisions like this lightly. Of course, Jinwoo said, rising from his chair with fluid grace. But while you are considering my offer, perhaps you should also consider the alternatives. What alternatives? Jinwoo moved to her window, looking down at the street below with eyes that cataloged every pedestrian, every parked car, every potential threat. The men who try to take Minjun know who you are now, Miss Kim. They know you interfered with their plans. They know you are important to him. Do you think they will simply forget about you? Zara felt cold spreading through her chest. Are you threatening me, Mr. Han? I am informing you of reality, he replied, turning back to face her. You saved my son, which makes you precious to me, but also dangerous to my enemies. Whether you accept my offer or not, your life has changed. The question is whether you will allow me to protect you while you help my son heal, or whether you will face the consequences alone. The apartment felt suddenly smaller, the walls pressing closer as the weight of her situation settled around her like a net. She had saved a child from predators, but in doing so, she had apparently made herself a target. The simple moral choice that had seemed so clear in the alley had ripple effects she was only beginning to understand. Before she could respond, a small voice called from the bedroom doorway. Miss Zara, are you going away? Minjun stood there in the pajamas she had bought for him the day before, his dark hair tousled from sleep and his eyes wide with the kind of fear that belonged to children who had lost too much already. He must have been listening from behind the door, absorbing every word of their conversation with the intensity of someone whose survival depended on understanding adult secrets. Oh, sweetheart, Zara said, kneeling to his level. Your father and I were just talking about some grown-up things. You are leaving, Minjun said, and it was not a question. Everyone leaves. Iyama left. The nice doctors left when Appa got angry. Now you're leaving too. Tears began sliding down his cheeks, silent and heartbreaking. Zara felt something crack inside her chest, a fault line that spread through all her careful reasoning and logical concerns. No one stays, Minjun whispered. No one ever stays with me. Jinwoo took a step forward, his composed mask slipping to reveal raw pain. Minjun, he began, but his son was already running to Zara, wrapping his arms around her neck with desperate strength. Please do not go. Miss Zara, the boy sobbed against her shoulder. I will be good. I will not have nightmares anymore. I will not ask for stories. Just please do not leave me alone. Zara held him close, feeling the tremors that shook his small frame, breathing in the scent of the children's shampoo she had used to wash his hair. Over his head, she met Jinwoo's eyes and saw her own anguish reflected there. This was not about money or safety or career opportunities. This was about a traumatized child who had lost his mother and now faced the prospect of losing the first person since her death who had made him feel safe. This was about a little boy who had been through too much and was asking for the only thing he really needed. Someone to stay. Zara closed her eyes and made the only choice her heart would allow. All right, she whispered against Minjun's hair. All right, sweetheart, I will stay, but only for a little while, just to make sure you are okay. Minjun pulled back to look at her face, his eyes searching for any sign that she might be lying. Really, he asked, you really will not leave? I really will not leave, Zara promised, and felt the words change something fundamental inside her chest. Not right now. Not when you need me. Jinwoo's expression showed relief, so profound it was almost painful to witness. Thank you, Miss Kim, he said quietly. You will not regret this decision. Zara was not so sure about that. But as she held Minjun's small hand in hers and felt his heartbeat slow from panic to hope, she realized that regret was less important than doing what was right. Even if what was right led her into a world where freedom was an illusion and safety came at the cost of everything she had thought she wanted from life. "When can we go to your house, Appa?" Minjun asked, still clinging to Zara's hand. "When can Miss Zara come home with us?" "Tonight," Jinwoo said, his voice carrying finality that brooked no argument. "We will go home tonight." The Han compound was a fortress disguised as a home, all clean lines and bulletproof glass overlooking the city from its perch in the hills. Zara stood in the marble foyer on her first morning, holding Minjun's hand and trying not to feel overwhelmed by the sheer scale of wealth surrounding them. Everything was white and gray and perfect, like a museum exhibit titled Modern Wealth. The furniture looked expensive enough to fund a hospital wing. The artwork probably cost more than most people's houses, and the silence was so complete it felt oppressive. "This is where you live?" she asked Minjun quietly. The boy nodded solemnly. "Appa says it is safe here. Nothing bad can get inside. But nothing good can get out either," Zara thought, studying the subtle but unmistakable signs of a house under siege. Security cameras in every corner. Reinforced windows that looked decorative but were clearly designed to stop bullets. Fresh flowers that had obviously been arranged by staff rather than family. No wonder Minjun had nightmares. This place felt more like a beautiful prison than a home. She squeezed his hand gently. "Well then, sweetheart, I think we need to make some changes." "What kind of changes?" Minjun asked, his voice dropping to a whisper, as if even suggesting alterations might bring consequences. "The kind that make this feel like a place where a little boy lives, instead of a place where he is simply stored for safekeeping." Over the next 3 weeks, Zara systematically transformed Jinwoo's perfect fortress into something that resembled an actual home. She started small, rearranging the furniture in Minjun's room so his bed faced the window instead of the door, giving him a view of the garden instead of the hallway where security guards passed at regular intervals. She convinced Jinwoo to let her take Minjun to the local art supply store, accompanied by enough bodyguards to invade a small country. They returned with colored pencils, watercolor paints, construction paper, and glue sticks. Minjun's artwork soon covered the refrigerator in the kitchen, bright splashes of color that made the sterile space feel suddenly alive. The cooking came next. The kitchen was a professional-grade marvel that had obviously never been used for anything more ambitious than reheating takeout. Zara remedied that by teaching Minjun to make pancakes from scratch, letting him crack eggs and measure flour while she told him stories about her grandmother's restaurant in Koreatown. The scent of real food began to fill the house. Korean-American fusion that honored both their backgrounds. Kimchi fried rice with scrambled eggs. Korean barbecue tacos that made Minjun giggle. American comfort food with Korean spices that created entirely new flavor combinations. Jinwoo watched all of this from a distance, appearing in doorways like a shadow, observing some fascinating social experiment. He never interrupted, never criticized, but his presence was a constant reminder that this was his domain and she was changing things without permission. The first real conflict came when she rearranged the living room furniture. "Miss Kim," Jinwoo said, appearing behind her as she pushed a massive leather couch toward the windows. "What exactly are you doing?" "Creating a conversation area where people can actually look at each other instead of staring at a television screen," she replied, not pausing in her efforts. "This room was arranged like a waiting room. Now it will be arranged like a place where families spend time together. The furniture is positioned for optimal security sight lines," Jinwoo said carefully. "My security team has specific requirements for monitoring the space." "Your security team can adapt," Zara said firmly, finally getting the couch into position near the windows where natural light could reach the seating area. "Minjun needs a place where he can play and read and feel like a normal child, not a place where he is constantly reminded that he is under surveillance." Jinwoo studied the new arrangement for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You are very determined, Miss Kim. I am very motivated, Mr. Han. Your son deserves better than living in a beautiful cage." Something shifted in Jinwoo's eyes, a crack in his armor that let through just a hint of vulnerability. "He's been safe here," he said quietly, "since his mother died. Keeping him safe has been my only priority." "Safe is not the same as alive," Zara replied gently. "He needs both." That evening, for the first time since she had moved into the compound, Jinwoo joined them for dinner. He sat at the massive dining table that had been set for three instead of his usual solitary place setting, watching with fascination as Minjun chattered about his day and showed off his latest artwork. "Miss Zara taught me how to paint sunsets," Minjun announced proudly, holding up a watercolor that was more enthusiasm than technique. "She says every sunset is different because the sky never gets tired of being beautiful." Jinwoo's gaze moved from the painting to Zara's face, something unreadable flickering in his dark eyes. "You have many interesting philosophies, Miss Kim. I have a lot of experience helping people heal, Mr. Han. Sometimes healing requires new perspectives." They ate in relative silence after that, but it was a different kind of quiet than the oppressive stillness that usually filled the house. This was the comfortable silence of people sharing space without conflict, of a family learning how to be together again. Later that night, Zara was in the kitchen cleaning up when Jinwoo appeared in the doorway, still wearing his perfectly tailored suit despite the late hour. "You have transformed this place," he said simply. "In 3 weeks, you have accomplished what I have been unable to do in 2 years. "What is that?" Zara asked, rinsing plates in the massive sink. "You have made my son happy." She glanced over her shoulder at him, noting the exhaustion that he usually hid so well. "When did you eat today, Mr. Han?" Jinwoo paused, clearly surprised by the question. "I had coffee this morning, and some crackers around noon." "That is not eating," Zara said, turning off the water and drying her hands. "That is surviving. Sit down. I will make you something real." "Miss Kim, you are not my caretaker," Jinwoo protested, but he settled into one of the kitchen stools anyway, watching as she moved efficiently through his own kitchen with the confidence of someone who had already made the space her own. "Everyone needs taking care of sometimes," she replied, pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. "Even intimidating business executives who think they can run on caffeine and determination." "I am not intimidating," Jinwoo said, and there was something almost playful in his voice that she had never heard before. Zara laughed, a warm sound that filled the kitchen with unexpected life. "Mr. Han, you are the most intimidating person I have ever met. You walk into rooms and the temperature drops 10 degrees. You speak and people jump to obey. You exist in a constant state of barely controlled danger that makes everyone around you nervous." She began cooking as she talked, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "But you are also a father who rearranges his entire schedule to have breakfast with his son. A man who keeps his wife's favorite flowers in the foyer, even though she's been gone for 2 years. Someone who would burn down the world to keep Minjun safe." Jinwoo was quiet for a long moment, watching her work. "How do you see so much, Miss Kim?" "Most people see only what I allow them to see." "Most people are not nurses," Zara replied, plating the simple meal she had prepared. "Nurses learn to see past what people show on the surface to what they actually need." She set the plate in front of him and was surprised when he caught her wrist gently, his fingers warm against her skin. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything, for seeing past the surface." The contact sent unexpected electricity through her arm, and she found herself studying his face with new attention. Without the harsh lighting and intimidating environment of business meetings, Jinwoo Han looked younger, more human. The lines around his eyes spoke of worry rather than cruelty, and his mouth, when it was not set in its usual stern line, had an almost gentle curve. "You are welcome," she said softly, acutely aware that he had not released her wrist and that she had no desire for him to do so. The moment stretched between them, filled with a tension that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with the sudden recognition that they were not just employer and employee, not just protector and protected, but man and woman sharing space and time, and something that felt suspiciously like intimacy. Then Minjun's voice echoed from upstairs, calling for Miss Zara with the plaintive tone of a child waking from bad dreams. The spell broke. Jinwoo released her wrist, and Zara stepped back, both of them suddenly aware of boundaries that had been temporarily forgotten. "Go to him," Jinwoo said quietly. "I will clean up here." Zara hurried upstairs to find Minjun sitting up in bed, tears streaming down his cheeks and his small hands clenched in the bedsheets. The nightmare had been a bad one. She could tell from the way his whole body trembled with remembered terror. She settled beside him on the bed, wrapping her arms around his shaking form and murmuring the same soothing words she had used that first night in her apartment. It took nearly an hour to calm him down, to chase away the shadows that lived in his dreams and replace them with stories of brave princes and gentle dragons. When she finally emerged from his room, she was surprised to find Jinwoo waiting in the hallway, leaning against the wall with an expression of profound exhaustion. "How long has he been having nightmares?" she asked quietly. "Since his mother died," Jinwoo replied. "Every night, sometimes multiple times per night. The doctor said it was normal for children who have experienced trauma, that he would grow out of it eventually." "And you?" Zara asked gently. "Do you have nightmares too?" Jinwoo's composure cracked just slightly, revealing depths of pain that he usually kept carefully hidden. "I do not sleep enough for nightmares, Miss Kim. Sleep is a luxury I cannot afford when my son's safety depends on constant vigilance." "But you cannot protect him if you collapse from exhaustion," Zara pointed out. "You cannot be everything he needs if you do not take care of yourself." "I am all he has," Jinwoo said simply, and there was such profound loneliness in those words that Zara felt her heart crack. "No," she said firmly. "He has me now, too, which means you do not have to carry everything alone anymore." Jinwoo looked at her with something that might have been wonder. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why do you care so much about a child who is not your own, about a family that you stumbled into by accident?" "Because caring is what I do," Zara replied simply. "Because everyone deserves someone who will stay awake when they have bad dreams. Because no one should have to face the darkness alone." She reached out without thinking and placed her hand against his cheek, feeling the tension in his jaw beneath her palm. "You're a good father, Jinwoo, but you're also just a man who needs rest and care and someone to remind him that he matters too." His eyes fluttered closed at her touch, and for a moment he leaned into her hand with the desperate relief of someone who had been carrying weight for too long. When he opened his eyes again, there was something raw and grateful there that made her breath catch. "Thank you," he whispered, "for staying, for caring, for seeing us as more than just a job." "You are more than just a job," Zara said softly, and realized as she spoke the words that they were truer than she had expected. Standing there in the hallway of his fortress home, her hand against his face and his son sleeping peacefully for the first time in months, Zara understood that everything had changed. She was no longer just a nurse hired to care for a traumatized child. She was no longer just an employee fulfilling the terms of contract. She was part of something that felt suspiciously like family, and the most dangerous man she had ever met had become the person who made her feel safest in the world. The call came at 3 in the morning, shattering the peaceful silence that had settled over the compound like a blessing. Zara awoke to the sound of Jinwoo's voice in the hallway, sharp and controlled even at this hour, speaking rapid Korean into his phone with the clipped efficiency of a general receiving battlefield intelligence. She slipped out of bed and cracked open her door, catching fragments of conversation that made ice settle in her stomach. School visit. Coordinated strike. Multiple entry points. Eliminate the threat permanently. When Jinwoo finally ended the call, she found him standing in his home office, still dressed in the clothes he had worn to dinner 12 hours earlier. A map of the city was spread across his desk, marked with red circles and tactical notations that looked like something from a war room. "What is happening?" she asked from the doorway, her voice barely above a whisper. Jinwoo looked up from the map, his face carved from stone and shadows. "My intelligence sources have intercepted communications about a planned attack. Tomorrow morning, when Minjun is supposed to visit his new school for orientation, there will be 12 men waiting. They plan to take him during the transition between the car and the building." 12 men, Zara repeated numbly. "To kidnap one little boy. To send me a message," Jinwoo corrected grimly. "Minjun is not the target, Miss Kim. He is the weapon they intend to use against me." They know that I will burn down half the city before I let them touch my son." His voice carried a cold certainty that made Zara's skin prickle with recognition. She was seeing the other Jinwoo now, the one whose reputation kept rivals awake at night. The man who had built an empire through intelligence, ruthlessness, and the absolute conviction that some lines should never be crossed. "So we cancel the school visit," she said reasonably. "We keep Minjun home where he is safe." Jinwoo's laugh was bitter and sharp as broken glass. "They will simply plan another attack, Miss Kim, and another after that. These people do not give up. They do not negotiate. They respond only to strength." "What are you saying?" Zara asked, though she suspected she already knew. "I am saying that tomorrow morning, while Minjun is safely locked in this compound, I will be visiting each of the 12 men they have positioned around his school. I will be explaining to them, in terms they cannot misunderstand, that threatening my family is a career-ending mistake." "Explaining," Zara repeated carefully. "Or killing." Jinwoo met her eyes without flinching. "Whatever is necessary to ensure they never threaten my son again." The room fell silent except for the hum of electronics and the distant sound of security guards making their rounds. Zara stared at this man she had come to care for, seeing clearly for the first time the violence that lived beneath his careful control. "I cannot be part of this," she said finally. "I cannot stay here and take care of your son while you go out and murder people. That is not who I am, Jinwoo." His expression did not change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Something that might have been pain. "I'm not asking you to be part of it, Miss Kim. I am asking you to understand that it is necessary." "Necessary for who?" she demanded, anger rising in her chest like a tide. "For you. For your pride. For your reputation in whatever bloody world you inhabit. But is it necessary for Minjun? Does he need his father to be a killer?" Jinwoo was across the room in 2 strides, moving with predatory grace that reminded her exactly how dangerous he could be. But when he spoke, his voice was controlled, almost gentle. "My son needs his father to be alive," he said quietly. "He needs the people who killed his mother to understand that threatening this family comes with consequences they cannot survive. Yes, Miss Kim, he needs me to be exactly what I am." "And what if I take him away?" Zara said, surprising herself with her own boldness. "What if I leave here tonight and take Minjun somewhere safe, somewhere far from your wars and your enemies and your necessary violence?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Jinwoo's stillness became something predatory, dangerous in a way that made her remember exactly who she was challenging. "You would not get 10 miles, he said softly. "My security would stop you before you reached the gates. And even if you somehow escaped, there is nowhere on earth you could hide my son where I could not find him." It was not a threat. It was simply fact, delivered with the quiet confidence of a man who had never encountered a problem he could not solve through application of money, influence, or force. But then his expression changed, the cold mask slipping to reveal something raw and desperate underneath. "Please do not take him from me, Zara," he said, and hearing her name on his lips for the first time made something flutter in her chest despite her anger. "He is all I have left of her. He is everything good that remains in my world. I cannot lose him too." The vulnerability in his voice nearly broke her resolve. This was not the cold crime boss making calculations about assets and liabilities. This was a father terrified of losing his child, a man who had already buried his wife and could not survive burying his son as well. "Then find another way," she pleaded. "There has to be something else you can do that does not involve becoming a monster." "I have been a monster for most of my adult life," Jinwoo said quietly. "The only question is whether I direct that monstrosity toward protecting my family or pretend it does not exist and watch them die because I was too civilized to do what was necessary." Before Zara could respond, the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a heartbeat later, bathing the compound in red emergency lighting that made everything look like a scene from hell. Alarms began wailing, and she could hear the sound of running feet in the hallways as security guards mobilized. Jinwoo was already moving, pulling a gun from a hidden drawer in his desk with fluid efficiency. "They came early," he said, his voice carrying deadly calm. Miss Kim, you need to get to Minjun now. Take him to the safe room in the basement. The code is 0614, his mother's birthday. Lock the door and do not open it for anyone except me. What about you? Zara asked, fear making her voice sharp. I'm going to handle this, Jinwoo replied, checking his weapon with practiced movements. Go, now. Zara ran through corridors lit by emergency lighting, her bare feet silent on marble floors as gunfire erupted somewhere in the house. She reached Minjun's room to find him sitting up in bed, wide-eyed but surprisingly calm. Miss Zara, he said as she burst through his door. The bad men found us, did they not? Yes, sweetheart, she said, scooping him up in her arms. But your father is taking care of them. We need to go somewhere safe until he is finished. The safe room was exactly what she had expected from Jinwoo's paranoid thoroughness. Reinforced steel walls, independent air supply, communications equipment, and enough food and water to survive a siege. She punched in the code with shaking fingers and pulled Minjun inside, locking them in just as she heard footsteps running past in the hallway above. For 20 minutes they sat in silence while gunfire echoed through the house like deadly thunder. Minjun curled against her side, not crying but alert in the way of children who had learned that survival required paying attention to adult fears. Then the sound stopped. The silence was somehow worse than the violence, filled with uncertainty about who had won and who was left standing. When the safe room door finally opened, Zara nearly sobbed with relief to see Jinwoo's face in the doorway. He was covered in blood, his expensive shirt torn, and his face carrying the cold emptiness of someone who had just done things that normal people could not imagine. It is over, he said simply. They're all dead. Minjun launched himself into his father's arms, seemingly unbothered by the blood or the violence that had just occurred. Appa, he said solemnly. Did you win? Yes, Jinwoo replied, holding his son close. The bad men will never bother us again. As they walked back upstairs through halls littered with evidence of the battle, Zara realized that she was not horrified by what Jinwoo had done. She should have been disgusted, terrified, desperate to escape this world of casual violence and deadly consequences. Instead, she felt safe. The men who had come to hurt Minjun were gone. Permanently. Jinwoo had kept his promise to protect them both, using methods she could not approve of but could no longer pretend to misunderstand. In the aftermath, as he coordinated with his security team and arranged for cleanup crews to remove all evidence of the night's events, Zara watched Jinwoo transform back into the controlled executive she knew. But now she could see past the facade to the warrior beneath, the man who would literally kill to protect the people he loved. When they were finally alone in his office hours later, Minjun safe in bed and the compound returned to its pristine state, Jinwoo sat heavily in his chair and buried his face in his hands. I'm sorry you had to see that, he said without looking up. I'm sorry you had to know what I am capable of when people threaten my family. Zara studied his bent head, noting the exhaustion that weighted his shoulders and the fine tremor in his hands that spoke of adrenaline crash and emotional overload. You saved us, she said quietly. Those men came here to hurt Minjun, and you stopped them. I cannot condone the methods, Jinwoo, but I cannot condemn the results either. He looked up at her then, his dark eyes holding depths of pain and hope in equal measure. Does that mean you will stay, he asked, even knowing what I am, even understanding what loving my family might cost you? Loving his family. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that neither of them was quite ready to examine directly. Yes, Zara said simply. I will stay. Not because I approve of your world, but because Minjun needs me. Because you need me. Because walking away now would mean abandoning the people who have become my family. Jinwoo crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms with desperate strength. Thank you, he whispered against her hair. Thank you for staying. Thank you for not running when you saw who I really am. Zara held him close, feeling the tremors that shook his frame, and understanding finally that Jinwoo's violence was not born from cruelty, but from love so fierce it transcended normal moral boundaries. He was not a monster who occasionally showed gentleness. He was a man who became monstrous when the people he loved were threatened. The distinction mattered more than she had expected it to. 3 weeks after the attack, Jinwoo stood in his office holding a single piece of paper that represented the end of everything and the beginning of something he was not sure he was brave enough to hope for. Zara's contract termination notice lay on his desk, signed and dated, officially releasing her from all obligations. Her month of employment had ended 2 days ago, extended only by the crisis and its aftermath. She was free to go wherever she chose, with a bank account substantial enough to ensure she never had to work again unless she wanted to. He had kept his word about the compensation, adding a completion bonus that reflected not just the terms of their agreement, but the reality of what she had meant to his family. Money felt inadequate for someone who had brought his son back to life and taught a dangerous man how to be human again, but it was the only currency he understood. The compound felt different now. The sterile perfection had given way to something warmer, more lived in. Minjun's artwork still covered the refrigerator. The furniture remained arranged for conversation rather than security sightlines. The kitchen smelled like real food instead of expensive takeout. But all of that could disappear as quickly as it had arrived. Zara could walk out the front door and never return, taking with her the laughter and warmth and sense of home that had transformed his fortress into a place worth defending. Jinwoo had eliminated the immediate threat with surgical precision. The rival syndicate that had targeted his family no longer existed, its leadership buried in graves that would never be found. His enemies now understood the cost of threatening Han Minjun, and that message would echo through the underworld for years to come. His son was safe. His business was secure. His reputation as someone not to be crossed had been reinforced with deadly clarity. By every measure that mattered in his world, Jinwoo had won completely. So why did he feel like he was about to lose everything that actually mattered? A soft knock interrupted his brooding. Zara appeared in the doorway, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater that made her look younger and somehow more precious than the expensive clothes he had provided. She held an envelope in her hands, and her expression carried the careful neutrality of someone preparing to deliver difficult news. "The signed contract, I assume," Jinwoo said, gesturing to the envelope. "Yes," Zara replied, stepping into the office but maintaining distance between them. "Everything is in order. My obligations have been fulfilled according to the terms we agreed upon." Her formal tone was like a knife between his ribs, professional and polite, and completely devoid of the warmth he had grown accustomed to hearing in her voice when she spoke to him. This was how she sounded when she was protecting herself, he realized. This was how she spoke when she was preparing to say goodbye. "The money has been transferred to your account as promised," Jinwoo said, matching her professional tone even though it felt like swallowing glass. "Along with the completion bonus we discussed. You should find the amount more than adequate for whatever future you choose to pursue." "Thank you," Zara said quietly. "You have been more than generous, Mr. Han." "Mr. Han," not Jinwoo. The formal distance was deliberate, a wall being rebuilt between them, just when he had thought all their walls had come down. "Have you given thought to what comes next?" he asked, desperately wanting to keep her talking, to delay the moment when she would walk out of his office and out of their lives forever. "Some," Zara admitted. "There are nursing positions available in other cities. Places where I could start fresh, build a new life without looking over my shoulder for your enemies or mine." Other cities. The words hit him like physical blows. She was not just leaving the compound. She was leaving the state, putting as much distance as possible between herself and the dangerous world he had dragged her into. "That is wise," he said, proud that his voice remained steady. "You will be safer away from here, away from the complications that come with being associated with my family." Zara studied his face for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Is that what you want, Jinwoo? For me to be safe somewhere else, building a new life with someone else's money, trying to forget that any of this ever happened?" The question caught him off guard. What he wanted seemed irrelevant compared to what she needed, what was best for her long-term survival and happiness. But she was asking, and he found himself unable to lie. "What I want is impossible," he said quietly. "What I want is for you to stay here, in this house, with Minjun and me. I want you to be part of our family, not because of a contract or obligation, but because you choose to be. I want to wake up every morning knowing that you are here, safe and happy and surrounded by people who love you." He paused, gathering courage for words that felt more dangerous than any business negotiation he had ever conducted. "I want to marry you, Zara, not as an employee or a hired caretaker, but as my partner in everything. I want to give you my name and my protection and everything I have built, and I want you to help me build something better, something worthy of the family we could create together." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Zara's expression had shifted from professional neutrality to something softer, more vulnerable, but Jinwoo could not read her well enough to know whether that was good or devastating. "What about Minjun?" she asked finally. "What does he want in all of this?" As if summoned by her question, Minjun appeared in the doorway, clearly having been listening from the hallway, with the focused attention of a child whose world was about to change again. "I want Miss Zara to be my Yama," he announced with the devastating honesty that only children could manage. "I want her to stay forever and make pancakes and tell stories and help Appa remember how to smile." Jinwoo felt his composure crack at his son's words. Minjun had not called anyone mother since his biological mother's death, had not even seemed to remember that other families had two parents instead of one paranoid father and a rotating staff of hired caregivers. But here he was, asking for exactly what Jinwoo wanted most and feared he could never deserve. Minjun padded across the office and climbed into Zara's lap with the casual confidence of a child who had never doubted her welcome. She held him automatically, her arms encircling his small frame with practiced tenderness. "I love you, Miss Zara," Minjun said solemnly, looking up at her with dark eyes that held absolute trust. "And Apple loves you too, even though he is scared to say so. Will you please stay and be our family?" Zara looked from Minjun's earnest face to Jinwoo's carefully controlled expression, reading the hope and terror that he was trying so hard to hide. This man who could face down armed assassins and eliminate entire criminal organizations was trembling at the prospect of her rejection. "I love you too, sweetheart," she said softly, pressing a kiss to Minjun's forehead. "And I love your father, even though he is the most dangerous and stubborn and impossibly complicated man I have ever met." Jinwoo's breath caught in his chest. She loved him, despite everything she had seen, everything she knew about his world and his methods and the violence that lived beneath his careful control. She loved him. "But," she continued, and his heart nearly stopped, "but I will not marry someone who thinks of me as a beautiful prize to be protected and displayed," Zara said firmly. "I will not be a possession in a fortress, no matter how gilded the cage might be. If we do this, Jinwoo, we do it as equals. Partners. I want real input in decisions that affect our family, real autonomy in my choices, and real respect for the strength I bring to this relationship." Jinwoo was across the room before she finished speaking, dropping to one knee beside her chair and taking her free hand in both of his. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Whatever you need, whatever you want. I do not want a beautiful possession, Zara. I want a partner strong enough to challenge me, brave enough to stand with me, and loving enough to help me become better than what I was before you." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small velvet box that he had been carrying for a week, hoping for the courage to use it. The ring inside was not the massive diamond that his wealth could have afforded, but a simpler design that seemed to suit her better. 3 stones set in platinum, past, present, and future. "Marry me," he said simply, "not as my employee or my dependent, but as my equal. Help me raise our son. Help me build something worthy of the love you have shown us both. Help me learn how to be the man you deserve." Zara looked at the ring, at Jinwoo kneeling beside her chair with vulnerability written across his face, at Minjun watching with hopeful eyes. 3 weeks ago, she had been a hospital nurse working double shifts and going home to an empty apartment. Now she was being offered a family, a fortune, and a future that would be anything but ordinary. "Yes," she said quietly, and watched Jinwoo's face transform with relief and joy. "Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will stay. Yes, I choose this family and this life and this love, even with all its complications. Jinwoo slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, then pulled both her and Minjun into his arms, holding them as if they might disappear if he loosened his grip even fractionally. 6 months later, Zara walked down an aisle lined with white roses and Korean peonies, wearing a dress that managed to be both elegant and practical. The wedding was small and private, held in the garden of their home with only the people who mattered most in attendance. Minjun stood beside his father at the altar, proudly carrying the rings and beaming with the satisfaction of someone whose deepest wish had finally come true. When a minister asked if anyone objected to the union, the boy actually turned around to glare at the assembled guests, as if daring anyone to speak up. Later, at the reception held in the same garden, now strung with lights and filled with music, Zara danced with her new husband while their son ran between tables accepting congratulations from Jinwoo's business associates and the nursing colleagues who had become her chosen family. They had blended their worlds more successfully than either had expected. Jinwoo's wealth provided security and opportunity, while Zara's warmth had transformed his organization from a cold business empire into something that felt more like an extended family. His employees now received better health care and education benefits. Her nursing background had led to partnerships with local hospitals and medical charities. Most importantly, they had created new traditions that honored both their backgrounds. Korean holidays celebrated with American comfort food, business dinners that included discussions of community outreach, security meetings that always ended with family time. As the evening wound down and the last guest departed, the three of them sat together in the garden swing that Zara had insisted Jinwoo install. Minjun was curled between them, drowsy from excitement and sugar, calling Zara Iyama with the casual affection of a child who had never doubted his place in their hearts. "Do you ever regret it?" Jinwoo asked quietly, his arm around Zara's shoulders as they watched fireflies dance among the roses. "Choosing this life instead of the simple one you could have had somewhere else." Zara leaned against his side, feeling the solid warmth of his presence and listening to the peaceful sound of Minjun's breathing. She thought about the nurse she had been before that night in the alley, working alone and going home to silence. She thought about the life she could have built with his money in some distant city, safe and comfortable and utterly empty of meaning. "Never," she said softly. "This is exactly where I belong. This is exactly the family I was meant to have." Above them, the stars shone down on a fortress that had become a home, protecting three people who had found in each other everything they had never known they needed. Love that was fierce enough to kill for and gentle enough to heal the deepest wounds. Safety that came not from walls and weapons, but from the absolute certainty that they would never have to face the darkness alone again. In the distance, the city lights twinkled like earthbound stars, but their world had narrowed to this garden, this swing, this perfect moment when everything dangerous and beautiful and impossible had somehow resolved into something as simple as family. Home, Zara thought, breathing in the scent of roses and sandalwood and the sweet smell of her sleeping son. This is what home feels like. And in Jinwoo's arms, surrounded by the life they had built together from the ashes of tragedy and the seeds of unexpected love, she knew that she had finally found a place where her heart could rest.